Here we're going to take a couple of fractions with exponents, and we're going to multiply. This little round dot just means multiply. So when we multiply two fractions, it's almost like just having one fraction. It's hardly even anything new. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to write this as one fraction. It's really 2 times x times -3 times y to the fifth times -3, oops, make that a negative sign, there we go, times -3 times x squared times y to the -2, all in the top of one fraction, over z squared times z to the 7th. Okay, that's all it is. When we multiply, it's really just like having one big fraction. So when I'm about to show you the things that we're going to do, I think you already saw this in a previous video. I'm just going to apply the product of powers, because I've got powers and I'd like to multiply them together. So we'll multiply this x to the -3 times this x squared. I am going to do things in a slightly different order. I like to move the negatives where they belong first before I do any multiplying or canceling. Some of you know that if I do x to the -3 times x squared, some of you recognize you could do this. You could say, well, that's going to be x to the -3 plus 2, which turns out to be x to the -1. That's completely reasonable if you get that, but I'm going to show you a slightly different way. So let me go ahead and get rid of all this. And what we're going to do is we are going to, I'm going to take the 2 times the -3, and that'll be -6, all right? I'm using the commutative property of multiplication that says I can rearrange the way if things are multiplied together, I can rearrange the way I multiply them, and I still get the same thing. So that -3 just goes right to the front. Now, if there was plus signs here, it'd be a different story, but we're talking about all multiply. So x to the -3 I'm going to bring to the bottom of the fraction, so it'll be x to the +3. And y to the -2 I'll bring to the bottom, so it'll be y squared down there. And then on the top I'm left with x squared and y to the 5th. And on the bottom I still have z squared times z to the 7th. This is 2 z's and 7 more z's. That makes 9 z's. So I'm going to combine them. That's known as a product of two powers. So it's a product of powers. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and cancel. Again, I've got 3 x's down here and 2 x's up there. So that means that I'll have 1 x left on the bottom and no x's on top. So -6 over 1 x on the bottom. I've got 5 y's on top, 2 y's on the bottom. That leaves me at 3 y's on top. And then z to the 9th on the bottom. So that wasn't so horrible, right? We did it, yay! And we did it all, starting with multiplying together two fractions with exponents. Okay, all right, so let's take a quick look at divide. Okay, so here is two fractions that are being divided. And so let's go ahead and see what happens here. Basically, there's a rule, and it goes something like this. All right, there's this tiny little rhyme, a sort of short poem that people used to say in the old days to remember how to divide by a fraction. It goes something like this. Ours is not to reason why, just invert and multiply. Well, in these days, we definitely want to try to reason why as best we can, but certainly if we're going to divide by this fraction, all we got to do is change that. All we got to do is flip this over and change that to multiply. So just invert and multiply. So -3 x squared, we leave the first fraction alone. And the second fraction we flip over, y to the 7th, 5 x to the -3, and then change the divide to multiply. Ours is not to reason why, just invert and multiply. We inverted and we're multiplying. And now we do all the stuff that we have done before. So this is really just one big fraction, and I can rewrite it as one big fraction, or I'll just, in my mind, it'll be one big fraction. So I'll deal with this negative exponent on the x. So I get -3 x squared Instead of, notice that there's 7 y's on top and 3 y's on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite. That means that if I crossed off these y's, I'd have 4 y's left on top and none on the bottom. So, and by the way, that means there's a 1 on the bottom. So that'll be y to the 4th. And then the 5 stays on the bottom. And then the x to the negative 3 moves to the top and becomes x to the positive 3. And then one last little deal is x squared times x cubed. So we get negative 3 times x squared times x cubed is x to the 5th, y to the 4th, and that's all over 5. And again, since the top is negative and the bottom's positive, I could just move that negative sign out in front, and maybe I'll do it just for good measure, so that I can show you that if you had to match this on a test, the answer might look like this, and I'd like you to know that. You should be able to match that up, whether the negative sign is here, or here, or here. All right, hope you enjoyed that.